Hey there, everybody. Brad Geiger here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And today we're going to talk about another one of those perennial topics of webcomics, one that I get asked to talk about an awful lot, and that is time management. How do you find the time to do webcomics? And let's face it, for most of us, this is something that we're doing in our spare time. We've got a day job, we've got other responsibilities and necessities that we need to cover, and it's really hard to find time to do a webcomic. Believe me, I understand this. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about time management. There's a lot of different ways that you can use to organize your time. There's planners like this guy right here. Take a look. I got this at Staples, I think. And it's got all kinds of different pages here. You got your calendars. I can put little sticky notes in there for different things. I've got places to keep loose leaf notes back here. It's fantastic, right? And there's also this. There's apps on your iPhone. This is the Reminder app. And you can set off, not only can you put reminders on there, but you can set it off so that it reminds you when you get to a certain vicinity. So for example, when you get to your studio or your workspace, you can remind yourself to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, and geez, don't forget these Post-it notes. Post-it notes, excellent reminders. I've got Post-it notes all over my computer. There's lots of different ways you can use to organize your time, and there's an unquestionable benefit to writing things down to help you remember them, or whether you do it in handwriting or writing it on your iPhone or a digital device. There's lots of benefits to that. However, none of that means bupkis. All right, you cannot purchase time management. And that's the problem that a lot of us get into. We realize the need to manage our times. We realize that we're not getting enough done. We realize that there's a deficiency there. And so we attempt to purchase time management. I'll download that $7 app. I'll go to Staples and I'll buy an organizer. I'll get Post-it notes and different colors, and I'll put them in all kinds of different places in my workspace, and that'll help me to manage my time. All of that is complete bupkis. What really matters is that you have to want to. And there's no purchasing that. There's no getting around it. It has to be a priority in your head. Okay, so let's talk instead of talking about time management, let's talk about prioritization. That's the key to time management. Without prioritization, this thing means nothing. Okay, prioritization means that your comic has to have a high priority in your life, and you have to get into the mindset through the day as you choose and all the different choices you make as you choose to do this thing, the next thing, and the next thing. You have to judge that on a system of priorities. So where are your priorities? Well, let's take care of a few easy hits. Your family, your partner, your spouse, your kids, that's a priority. Those things take precedent over almost anything. Your employment, your job, the way you pay bills, bring the money in to maintain this style of life that allows you to try to develop a webcomic, that's a priority. And of course, they've got you for 8 hours a day. That is a kind of clearly demarked time. That's kind of easy. The webcomic has to be up there in the top 3, okay? And that means I still remember Robert Koo standing at a comic convention and somebody coming up and saying, I wanna really be where you guys are. I want to do the thing that you do. And he says, yeah. He says, that's great. What's your favorite video game? And they said, Call of Duty. And he says, not anymore. doing webcomics is your favorite video game. What's your favorite tabletop? And the guy says, well, I've got a weekly D&D, blah, blah. No. Webcomics is your favorite tabletop. If you want to do what we do, it's got to be your number one thing. I know there's a lot of eye rolling when I tell that story. I've told it at conventions all the time, and I get my fair share of eye rolling. I don't know that he was being literal, but he was making a very important point, and that is you've got to want to do this so badly that it does not get put off by anything in your life. And you can say, well, for example, somebody might say, the video games I play inspire the comics that I write. That all gets put in. That's fine, but it's got to come in its proper place on your list of priorities. And if you're spending time playing video games, if you're spending time doing anything that's not on your top 3 list of priorities, then obviously you've got misplaced priorities if you want to do webcomics at a really high level. All right, now listen, there's nothing that says you've got to want to do webcomics at a high level. This can be an enjoyment thing for you. That's fine. But if you're really trying to up your game, if you're trying to do it at a higher level, it's got to take the highest priority after your family and after your job. It's got to be right up there in the top 3. And it's got to be a no-brainer. You've got to mark out time. Now, what I often hear when I get into this conversation with people is, but I've got a family. I've got a job. I've got a 40-hour-a-week job. I've got kids at home. I've got a spouse that I'd like to spend some time with. And the answer is, yeah, that's really hard. Actually, I'm going to tell you the truth. Having been on both sides of that, it was way easier when I had a day job and my kids were smaller than they are now. Way easier, because there was no question. There was no decision making. When you are operating at that level of responsibility, where you've got to work 40 hours a week, you've got to do certain things at home, or else it's going to start falling apart. If you've got responsibility with your spouse and your kids, the rest is that time is there. You take that time. It's not even a question of should I play a video game or should I do a webcomic. It's like, oh my God, I finally have time. I'm going to demark that time. I spent many years living on 5 hours sleep, 6 hours sleep, and that's not a machismo thing. I really do believe that once your body gets used to that, it can process that. It hits REM earlier, and you can survive. Ask any parent of young kids. It sucks, it stinks, but you can survive. You can get used to it. I spent many years doing that. I worked nights at the newspaper, and I would get home between midnight and 1 o'clock, depending on the news cycle that day, and I would be up at 6 o'clock the next morning getting my kids ready for school. And that time after I dropped them off to school and before school let out, that was my time to do comics. And then I would pick them up, rush home. I would see my wife for 10 minutes as we literally switched roles. She came home from work. I went off to work. We often gave each other a quick peck on the cheek on the way into work. And then I went in there and started at 4 o'clock and went until 1 o'clock the next morning. And the whole thing would start again. It was brutal. It was brutal. I don't know that we could have made it much longer than we did. But I will tell you this, having stopped when I was faced with with an imminent layoff and was offered a buyout. When I left in 2012, the biggest problem I had all of a sudden was time management, because I never had to think about it before. It was a no-brainer. Of course, I wasn't going to sit down and play a video game. That would have been impossible for me to get my head around. Time management is a lot easier when you are full up to every last minute is taken. Time management's a lot harder when you've got choices to make. And that's why I say it's not about that app that you're going to download on your iPhone. It's not about buying an organizer. You can't purchase time management. It's got to be all about really sitting down and having a talk with yourself and saying, what are my priorities? And then as you go through your day, you know that you've got certain choices. I've got an hour before I've got to go pick up the kids from school. What am I going to do with that hour? You can choose 100 different things to do in that hour, all right? But if you have your priorities right, if you have that set in your mind, I'm going to sit and do something. And listen, we kind of give ourselves a sliding scale all the time. I know I've done this quite a bit. Well, I can't get anything done in an hour. I'll just sit down and play a video game, or I'll pull up an app on my phone or scroll through Facebook. I've done that too. Okay, but the thing is, you can get significant things done in micro bursts of time. 15 minutes, even sitting and idly doodling or sketching. Your mind is always at work when you're doing that. The benefits may not be immediate, but over time, that time is well spent. So yeah, use the time that you've got. That was the secret of how I made it through, well, let's see, when did I leave the Daily News? 2012? That's how I made it through 12 years, more than that, 14 years of having a day job and doing a daily comic. Was not only did I have my priorities dead set, but I was willing to take the time that nobody else wanted. And that's a secondary headline there. Number one is you've got to want it. You've got to make it priority. Number two is take the time that nobody else wants. So on Saturday morning when everybody was sleeping in, I set my alarm for 6 o'clock, and I got up and I started working on comics until people started rolling out of bed. This works a lot better, as you know, if you've got young kids. This works a lot better once your kids are a little bit older. But the same thing remains. Oh, and by the way, little kids, I incorporate both of my boys. I incorporated them into my drawing. I put a little playpen right in my workspace, and the kids would sit there, watch me draw. I would talk to them while I was drawing. I got as much done like that until the kids were finally like, nah, okay, I'm done with this playpen. I want to do something else now. And then when that happens, well, you disengage, even if you're in the zone, and it's frustrating. There's no doubt about that. It's frustrating, and you go back to dad mode. And then but even then, see what I would do a lot of times, especially this is great with infants. Infants are fantastic. They have a very they're a very easy audience. So a lot of times when my kids were infants, I would sit there and talk to them, and I would talk about storyline ideas that I was having, free form, free floating kind of free association kind of thoughts. Infants love it. They have no idea what you're talking about. I couldn't possibly bore an infant the way I bore my kids now. But infants love that. And I would say, you talk to a baby, you use that baby voice. And I would get all kinds of brainstorming and loose story ideas out just talking to infants, which explains a few storylines that I came up with, I guess. But that carried over. A lot of times when my kids got older, it was fantastic when they were old enough to talk back, because then I would talk about storylines with them. And I'd say, yeah, I'm working on this thing where somebody does this and somebody does that. And if you've got kids, that there's one thing that kids love more than anything else. Not only is it being paid attention to by an adult that loves them, but being treated like an equal. You never see my 10-year-old, or he's 11 now, but it really kind of took root when he was 10. He never stood taller than when I was talking to him about story ideas. You can see it wash all over them. They love to be included in that stuff. And although not a lot of their ideas are stuff that you can take and plug and put directly into your comic, it is beneficial to have a certain amount of feedback, to have, and a lot of times the stuff that he would come up with was crazy and outlandish, but the sheer creativity of it all fed into keeping me playful and silly in my approach to writing, which is a benefit. So a lot of times I incorporated. I tried to get the best of both worlds. I was in cartoon dad mode instead of just cartoon mode or just dad mode. I was in cartoon dad mode, and it was great. My kids both have a love of comics as a result. They taught themselves to read. Reading comics, and they still. We're going to be going to Wizard World Philly. I won't have a table this weekend, but we're still going to go just because they like it so much. It's been a good thing. So, but I couldn't have done that without taking the time that nobody else wanted, and that means staying up after everybody's gone to bed. That's still something I do, just out of habit. Because now that I don't, and now that I can make looser decisions, I choose to spend more time with my kids than I used to because I can now. And the price I pay for that is after they go to bed. Now it's time for dad to work in a quiet house, no less. There's not too much bad about that. But take the time that nobody else wants. That's your time. And if your priorities are straight, then it's a no-brainer. You know what you're going to be working on during that time when the house is quiet. You're going to be working on your comics. I don't know that time management is any more complicated than that. Now, having said that, I will say this about I don't want to totally poo-poo things like apps and these planners and stuff. In fact, if that's helps you to organize your thoughts, that's fantastic. Again, I think it's got to come after getting your priorities straight in your mind. But one thing I did this year that really has helped is that I sat down with this thing at the beginning of the year, and I sat down and I mapped out the entire year. And you can see I've got little stickers there that show where Kickstarters are happening and where different books are supposed to be in and when certain things are supposed to happen. I mapped out the entire year. I can't tell you truthfully that it's going to be June in a day. I can't tell you that at the halfway mark that I've stuck to that plan. It's gotten very loose. I was supposed to be launching my second Kickstarter by now, and I just don't feel comfortable doing that until I've started shipping the Kickstarter that has already launched and funded. But having sitting down in January and having that look at the calendar and saying, this is what we're going to do. This is where different dates are going to fall. Sit down with the kids' school calendar. Here's the first day of school. Here's the last day of school. Here's where camps are going to fit. Stuff like that has been beneficial. I wish I could tell you that I pour through the calendar every day, but I don't. and sometimes I make mistakes based on that. But having a planner and particularly sitting down at the beginning of the year and mapping the year out, even in a loose way, has been a benefit. I've got all kinds of Post-it notes posted across my computer down here. That is a benefit. Though I don't want you to think that I totally downplay the importance of journaling and these organizer books and apps and Post-it notes and stuff like that. But I do want to say that you just can't purchase time management. It's got to come from your own personal priorities. And a lot of times it's not easy. It's not easy at all. But I will tell you this, there are many times that I would almost go back to having those decisions set in stone because it was way easier when I was working a 40-hour job and that comic had to come in at a certain at a certain time. It's very easy for me now to procrastinate and kid myself and you'll do this later and decision making like that. and I end up making some bad time management decisions as a result. It was a lot easier when this stuff was kind of pre-decided. But it's a decision-making process that you've got to figure out on your own. And the first step, like I said, is deciding that this is a priority. This is Brad Geiger. Hit the comments at webcomics.com. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you use to organize your time. Is it an app? Is it an organizer? And what's your system? This could kind of be a fun conversation. Hit those comments. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.